As promised, in his first live interview since the verdict, I'm joined now by the former acting U.S. ambassador to Iraq, Joseph Wilson. Thank you again for your time tonight, sir.
Nice to be with you, Keith.
It has been 5 years this month since your trip to Niger. Is there any sense of personal vindication tonight after all you've been through after today's conviction of Scooter Libby?
Well, I think Valerie and I will both sleep easier tonight, knowing that at least one part of this is behind us. I take no satisfaction in this. I think that the idea of a senior White House official being convicted of obstruction of justice and perjury is something that ought to sadden everybody who believes in public service. The responsibility of a public servant to uphold and defend the Constitution is besmirched when they're convicted of crimes like this. On the other hand, of course, I think it reconfirms that this is, in fact, a nation of laws and that no man is above the law. And I think we can take some satisfaction that the Constitution has been defended by the prosecution, by the system of justice, and by the jury of peers that decided Mr. Libby's guilt today.
Your wife clearly has believed in public service all this time. Share with me what you can of Valerie's reaction today.
Well, I think she wept when she heard the news. I was actually in a restaurant in Washington, D.C., and she called me up and she just said, 4 out of 5 guilty. And she was very relieved. I think she will sleep well tonight, knowing, again, that this part of this ordeal is behind us. But I would just say that whatever the last 4 or 5 years have been like for us, it's been mere inconvenience compared to what this administration has done to our service people and their families in the prosecution of a war that was justified on misinformation and lies, and was really undertaken not for the national security of the United States, but to prove an academic theory, which wasn't a very good academic theory at that.
What did that jury verdict today establish about the president, write in stone about the president and the vice president, and the necessity or the needlessness of the war in Iraq?
Well, clearly the evidence that came out during the course of this trial demonstrated there was an obsession not with getting the facts out, but with destroying and impugning my integrity. And they used Valerie's employment and her status as a covert officer to do so. What this says about the president and the vice president, I don't really know. I think that, frankly, now that the trial is over, the president and the vice president ought to quit hiding behind the investigation and the trial, and I think they ought to step forward and tell the American people what they know. And I think they can begin by sharing the contents of their interviews with Mr. Fitzgerald during the investigatory phase of this.
Do you expect that to happen? I mean, the president's office, the White House, refused to comment further today, other than saying that it's an ongoing legal case, which is something we've heard 1,000 times before. Do you think that's going to change for any reason?
Well, I don't know. The president also said that he would fire anybody involved in the leak. We know that Karl Rove was involved in it. We have that testimony on the record, and he's still employed by the White House. So I don't know what to say. Was the president going to keep his word on this or anything?
Well, to that point of the others, one of the jurors said, the one who spoke publicly, that something that has been on a lot of minds, on a lot of lips today, why only Mr. Libby? The prosecutor, Mr. Fitzgerald, said he does not anticipate any more charges in the case. The implication in that, perhaps, that there's not even a prospect of flipping Mr. Libby to testify against anybody else because nobody else will be prosecuted. Are today's guilty verdicts, if they are the end of it, are they sufficient?
Well, I leave that to the prosecutor and to the system of justice, criminal justice. We, of course, have filed a civil suit, and we're hopeful that that civil suit will be heard, and we will be allowed to do discovery and get the statements of Mr. Cheney and Mr. Libby, Mr. Rove, and Mr. Armitage, and perhaps others. None of them spoke at this trial, so I think that there still is our effort to get the truth out and to hold civil servants and senior public servants accountable for their actions, for really abusing the public trust in the exercise of a personal political vendetta.
But there were no charges pertaining to the abuse of the public trust. There were no charges for the leak itself. There was no charge for endangering a valuable commodity in your wife's CIA career, only for lying in the course of the investigation. Is that a negative note sounding behind the positive ones today?
Well, I don't think so. Mr. Fitzgerald said at the time of the press conference when he announced the indictments that justice would be served through the prosecution, irrespective of the crime that was being prosecuted. And in fact, as we saw in the run-up to the trial, the defense attempted to use what they call gray mail. They attempted to force the government to decide how much classified information it was willing to release in order to allow the case to go forward. Had there been a prosecution for the underlying crime, you can be sure that Mr. Libby's defense would have asked for every classified document that ever touched his desk during the 6 years that he was in office. So I think the indictment was narrowly drawn, and it was understood that prosecuting under the underlying case, the IIPA, the Intelligence Identities Protection Act, might be too difficult because of the way that the act is drafted and by the possibility of classified information not being available for the defense.
The Vice President issued a statement today saying he's very disappointed with the verdict. The President was quoted today as saying he was saddened for Scooter Libby and his family. Has any sadness ever been expressed by anyone in the administration to you or to your family?
No, not at all. And I would have appreciated the President acknowledging some sadness for the fate of a covert CIA officer who spent 20 years serving her country, many of those overseas, many of those in what's known as non-official cover, where she didn't even have the benefit of diplomatic protections if she had been picked up for espionage. Yeah, I would have welcomed that, but I would also welcome from the President of the United States some acknowledgement of what he's put our military through in the prosecution of this war in Iraq.
Is there some ability now tonight that we did not have, say, this morning, to say that the President, in conducting this war and getting us into this war and your wife's career being thrown under the bus in the process, was really the baby going out with the bathwater, that we were looking for WMDs and trying to prevent a connection between rogue states and terrorists and weapons that could harm this country, and all we managed to do was increase that slightly by ending the career of somebody who was focused on preventing that thing from happening?
Well, I can't really talk about what Valerie was doing. In fact, we're hopeful that she'll be able to get her book out. The CIA has taken a look at it, and they have no particular objections to the contents. They're trying to claim that she did not work for them before 2002, or cannot acknowledge she worked for them before 2002, which is sort of an Alice in Wonderland through the looking glass. We may have to litigate that. This is not the USSR. This is America, and she has a right to tell her story, particularly when everybody and their uncle has already tried to tell it on her behalf. So we're going to litigate that, but neither I nor she would ever talk about what specifically she was doing, a lot of which I don't know, frankly.
Goodness. The ultimate, I guess, the ultimate Alice in Wonderland quality to this entire event would be if the end result of Mr. Libby's conviction were not a sentence or a fine or it being overturned in court, but if he were in fact pardoned by President Bush. Are you anticipating that as a possibility? Do you have you steeled yourself for that? Do you have a reaction to the prospect even of it?
Well, the President obviously has the absolute right under the Constitution to pardon, but I think there's a lot of ethical questions involved. After all, Mr. Libby was an assistant to the President, and so I think there's an implicit and explicit conflict of interest in the President exercising his pardon authority on behalf of somebody who worked for him. I think it would be appropriate for the President and indeed the entire administration to recuse itself, allow the wheels of justice to turn as they must, and if there's going to be a pardon discussed, it should be by a subsequent administration, and there should be an appeal process as is normal. And Mr. Libby knows a lot about this because he was instrumental in fighting for the pardon of Mark Rich, one of the most notorious fugitives from justice from the 1980s, for whom Libby was an attorney.
And ultimately, and finally, sir, I guess that you could say that the whatever might be pardoned away in the future, the facts that were established today by that jury cannot be pardoned away.
Well, Scooter Libby, convicted felon. That is really a sad statement for this country. But again, I look on the bright side. The Constitution was defended by this action, this jury of his peers, and we are most appreciative of the efforts of the judge, the prosecution, and the jury to deal with this matter.
As we are most appreciative of your time again. Ambassador Joseph Wilson, in the wake of the Libby verdicts, thank you kindly, and thank you especially for joining us first here on the show.
Thanks, Keith, very much.